Future wife, I need to tell you something before I ask you what I'm about to ask, because I don't want the words that follow to land the wrong way, and I think you deserve the full context before you hear the actual question. I'm not saying this to pressure you, and I'm not saying it as some kind of ultimatum meant to force your hand before you're ready. I'm saying it because I think honesty, complete honesty, about exactly where I stand, is the only fair way to ask you something this enormous. So future wife, here it is. I'm going to ask you to marry me tonight. And after tonight, however you answer, I'm never going to ask again. I need you to understand what I actually mean by that, future wife, because I think it could easily sound harsher than I intended, more like a threat than what it actually is, which is simply respect. If tonight isn't the right time for you, if your answer is anything other than a complete, certain yes, I'm not going to keep asking every few months, hoping the timing eventually shifts in my favor. I'm not going to turn this into some ongoing pressure hanging over both of us, some unresolved question quietly straining every conversation about our future. I think you deserve better than that, future wife, and honestly I think I deserve better than that too. So instead, I'm asking once completely honestly, and then I'm going to respect whatever answer you give me, fully, without resentment, without repeated attempts to change your mind afterward. I want to explain why tonight, future wife, why I've chosen this specific moment instead of waiting for some more elaborate, more carefully planned occasion. I think, if I'm honest with myself, I've been waiting for the perfect moment for longer than I probably should have, telling myself I needed more savings, more stability, some clearer sense that every practical detail had fallen precisely into place before I could finally ask this question. But future wife, sitting here now, I've realized something important. There isn't actually a perfect moment waiting for me somewhere in the future. There's just this moment, imperfect and ordinary, and completely real, and future wife, I think that's actually the only kind of moment love ever really gets to happen inside. I think about everything we've built together up to this point, future wife, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion, over and over. No matter how many times I examine it from different angles. We already know how to love each other through difficulty. We've already proven that to each other, more than once, through hard conversations and honest mistakes, and the difficult, patient work of rebuilding trust when it's occasionally been damaged. Future wife, I don't think I need more time to become certain about that. I think I've already gathered all the evidence I need, and continuing to wait simply because some arbitrary sense of readiness hasn't fully arrived yet feels, increasingly, like fear disguising itself as patience. I think about my own fear, specifically future wife. The fear underneath this entire confession. The fear of asking and hearing anything other than an immediate, certain yes. I think that fear is exactly why I've been telling myself I needed more time, more preparation, more certainty about circumstances beyond either of our control. But future wife, sitting here tonight, I've decided I'd rather face that fear directly, honestly, than keep hiding behind endless preparation that might never actually feel complete, no matter how long I wait for it. Future wife, I want you to know exactly what I'm offering you if your answer is yes tonight, because I think specificity matters more than vague, sweeping declarations. I'm offering you a partner who has already proven, through real difficulty, that he chooses honesty over comfortable avoidance, even when honesty is hard. I'm offering you a partner who has already learned, through genuine mistakes, exactly how much daily, consistent effort real trust actually requires, and who has already demonstrated a willingness to do that work, rather than simply talking about it in the abstract. I'm offering you a family, my family, who already loves you completely, who has already welcomed you so thoroughly, that my grandmother has already entrusted you with jewelry that's been passed down through 4 generations of women before you. Future wife, I want you to know too exactly what I'm not offering, because I think honesty about limitations matters just as much as honesty about strengths. I'm not offering you perfection. I'm not offering you a relationship free of future mistakes or future difficult conversations. I think, if anything, everything we've already been through together has taught me that those difficulties are actually part of what love requires, not evidence that love has somehow failed. What I'm offering you, future wife, is my complete commitment to facing whatever difficulties arise together, honestly, patiently, without ever again choosing convenient avoidance over the harder, more valuable truth. I think about the ring sitting in my pocket right now. Future wife, the same one I first told you about weeks ago. The one that's been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. I think about everything that's happened since I first bought it. The dinner with my father. The discoveries he made about your character. The conversation about your own mother's decades-old promise. The difficult mistake and the honest, patient repair that followed it. Future wife, I think every single one of those experiences has actually made me more certain about this question, not less, has proven, repeatedly, exactly why you're the only person I want to ask it to. I asked, because I think the space between finishing that explanation and actually getting down on one knee felt longer than almost any other moment in my entire life. And I think you deserve to know exactly what was going through my mind during those final seconds before everything changed between us. I remember my hands were steady this time, future wife, steadier than I expected them to be given everything I'd just admitted to you, given how much vulnerability I'd already poured into that explanation before ever reaching the actual question. I think that steadiness came from finally releasing the pressure I'd been carrying for weeks. The pressure of waiting for some perfect circumstance that was never actually going to arrive on its own. Future wife, once I stopped waiting and simply decided tonight was the night, something in me settled completely, calm in a way I hadn't expected given how much was riding on the next few minutes. I got down on one knee, future wife, right there in our own living room, no restaurant this time, no crowd of strangers watching, just the two of us. Exactly as ordinary, and exactly as real as everything else we've built together. And future wife, I asked you, plainly, without any more elaborate speech, just the simple, direct question I'd been building toward this entire time. Will you marry me? And then I waited, future wife, watching your face, feeling that same suspended, unbearable silence I remembered from our very first proposal attempt. Except this time, I understood immediately that the silence carried something different in it. You didn't cry the way you did before, future wife. Not immediately. You just looked at me for a long moment, steady, considering. And I understood, watching your face, that you were actually taking this seriously in exactly the way I'd hoped you would. Not rushing toward an automatic emotional response, but genuinely weighing everything I'd just told you. Everything we've been through together. Everything this specific moment actually meant, given the finality I'd attached to it. Future wife, I want you to know that in that suspended silence, I found myself completely at peace with whatever you were about to say, and I think that peace surprised me more than almost anything else about that entire evening. I'd spent weeks anxious about this exact moment, terrified of hearing anything other than an immediate yes, and yet, kneeling there, watching you think carefully instead of react automatically, I felt something closer to gratitude than fear. Understanding that whatever answer emerged from that careful consideration would actually mean more than an automatic response ever could have. You finally spoke, future wife, and you told me yes, but you told me something else first. Something I think mattered even more than the answer itself. You told me you appreciated that I'd ask this way, honestly, without pressure disguised as romance, without any manipulation hidden inside the finality I'd attached to the question. You told me that hearing me explain so clearly that I would respect any answer, even a difficult one, actually made saying yes feel more meaningful than it might have felt if you'd sensed any coercion underneath the question, any subtle suggestion that saying no would somehow disappoint or damage what we already share. Future wife, I think that distinction matters more than almost anything else about this entire evening, and I want to make sure I explain it carefully. because I think it's important. You told me that too many proposals, at least the ones you've heard about from friends, carry an invisible pressure inside them, an unspoken assumption that saying no, or even needing more time, would somehow be a betrayal of the relationship itself. And future wife, you told me that by explicitly telling you I would respect any answer, by making clear this was a genuine question, rather than a performance expecting only one acceptable response, I'd actually given you the freedom to answer honestly, instead of simply performing the expected emotional reaction. I think about that distinction now, future wife, understanding it more deeply the more I sit with it. I think real love, the kind actually worth building an entire life around, has to include that specific kind of freedom, the freedom to answer honestly even when honesty might disappoint the person asking, the freedom to take a question seriously, rather than simply performing whatever response feels socially expected in the moment. Future wife, I think that's actually part of what I was trying to offer you tonight. Not just a proposal, but a demonstration of exactly the kind of respect and honesty I promised you during that difficult conversation weeks ago about my own pattern of avoiding uncomfortable truths. You put on the ring yourself, future wife, something neither of us had planned in advance, but something that felt right in that particular moment, your own hands steady, deliberate, choosing this future actively, rather than simply receiving it passively from me. And future wife, I think that small detail, unplanned as it was, actually captured something important about who we've become together, through everything we've navigated this past year. Two people choosing each other actively, deliberately, again and again, rather than simply falling into a future neither of us consciously decided to build. We stayed there on the living room floor for a long time afterward, future wife. Neither of us in any hurry to move. Both of us processing everything that had just happened between us. You told me you wanted to call your mother immediately, and I watched you make that call, watched your face light up, hearing her reaction, understanding, all over again, exactly how much this moment rippled outward into every relationship that has shaped and supported us across our entire lives. I called my own parents too, future wife, and I heard that same overwhelming joy from my mother. That same quiet, satisfied confirmation from my father. Everything he'd learned during his careful research finally, completely validated by this permanent, official commitment now sitting on your hand. Future wife, I think about the promise I made at the very beginning of this confession, that after tonight, I would never ask again regardless of your answer. And future wife, I think that promise actually meant something important, even though your answer turned out to be yes. It meant that this yes wasn't extracted through pressure, or repeated asking, or gradual wearing down of any hesitation you might have carried. It was freely given, completely, in a single moment where you understood clearly that no other outcome was being quietly demanded of you. Future wife, I think that's exactly the foundation I want our marriage to be built on, honest questions freely answered, respect that holds even in moments of enormous vulnerability, and a love that never needs pressure or ultimatums to prove itself real. I think adds an important layer to everything we've already talked about regarding that proposal. We were lying in bed, unhurried, both of us still slightly amazed by the ring now permanently settled on your hand, and you told me you wanted to explain something about your own hesitation in that suspended moment, before you finally answered, something you hadn't fully articulated the night before. In the immediate emotional aftermath of it all, you told me that during that long silence, future wife, you weren't actually uncertain about your answer at all. You knew, almost instantly, that you wanted to say yes. What took the time, you explained, was something else entirely, a kind of internal reckoning with the finality I'd attached to the question, understanding fully, in that moment, that you were making a decision that would shape literally the rest of your life, and wanting to honor that weight properly, instead of rushing past it toward an automatic response. Future wife, you told me you'd actually thought, in that silence, about your own parents' marriage, about the specific moment your mother once described to you, deciding to marry your father, and how she'd always told you that real commitment requires a kind of conscious, deliberate choosing. Not just swept up in the romance of a moment, but actually understanding, clearly, exactly what you're agreeing to build together. You said you wanted your own answer to carry that same weight, that same deliberate consideration, rather than simply reacting to the emotional intensity of the proposal itself. I think about that explanation now, future wife, and I understand it more deeply than I did in the moment itself. Understanding that your silence wasn't hesitation about me specifically, but reverence for the decision itself. A refusal to treat something this permanent carelessly, however genuinely certain you already felt underneath that careful consideration. Future wife, I think that quality, that instinct toward genuine reverence, rather than automatic emotional performance, is actually one of the deepest reasons I fell in love with you, in the first place. And I think watching it show up, even in the proposal itself, only confirmed everything I already believed about your character. I told you, future wife, lying there that morning, that I was grateful for that silence now, understanding its full meaning, even though I genuinely struggled through the anxiety of it in the actual moment. And you told me something else too, something that surprised me a little. You told me you were grateful I'd given you the space for that silence in the first place. That if I'd immediately started talking, filling the quiet with nervous reassurance or repeated versions of the question, you might not have had room to actually process everything you needed to process before answering honestly. Future wife, I think about how easily that moment could have gone differently, how my own anxiety, uncontrolled, might have crowded out exactly the space you needed to make this decision, the way you actually wanted to make it. I think that's part of what I learned through everything we worked through these past several weeks. That real love sometimes means tolerating your own discomfort, your own anxious uncertainty, in service of giving the other person exactly what they need, instead of what would simply make your own anxiety resolve more quickly. We talked that morning too, future wife, about what comes next, about wanting to actually enjoy this engagement, rather than rushing immediately into wedding planning logistics, the way some couples apparently do. You told me you wanted to simply exist in this specific feeling for a while first, this quiet, settled certainty, now permanently woven into our everyday life together, before diving into the practical details of dates and venues and guest lists. Future wife, I told you I completely agreed, that I wanted the same thing, understanding that this particular season, engaged but not yet married, carries its own unique, irreplaceable texture that deserves to be fully experienced, rather than rushed past toward the next milestone. I think about the word forever a lot these days, future wife, the way I've told you before, in earlier confessions, but I think I understand it slightly differently now, having actually asked and received your answer rather than simply imagining what that moment might eventually feel like. Forever doesn't feel abstract anymore, future wife. It feels like this specific morning, unhurried and quiet, your hand finding mine under the blankets, the ring catching early light exactly the way I imagined it would all those weeks ago when I first bought it. Forever feels like all the small, ordinary mornings still ahead of us, each one adding another quiet layer of proof to everything we've already built together. I called my grandmother again that morning too, future wife, wanting to tell her that the jewelry she gave us had officially witnessed its purpose fulfilled, that you were now permanently, officially joining the family legacy she'd entrusted you with weeks earlier. And future wife, she cried again, the way she seems to do every time this story reaches another significant milestone. And she told me something I think you should hear directly. She said, watching this entire journey unfold, from my father's careful research through the difficult mistake and its honest repair, through this final, deliberate proposal, has convinced her more completely than almost any relationship she's witnessed in recent memory, that some marriages are actually built to last, tested honestly along the way, rather than simply protected from ever facing real difficulty at all. Future wife, I think about her words often now, understanding that everything we've navigated together, the hard conversations and the honest repairs, and now finally, this permanent commitment, has actually prepared us more thoroughly for marriage than an easier, less examined relationship ever could have accomplished. I think we know each other now, completely, difficulties and all. in a way that feels far more solid than the more superficial certainty we might have carried into an engagement built entirely on ease and unexamined comfort. Future wife, I don't think that makes the difficulties we faced worth celebrating in themselves. But I think it makes everything we've built since genuinely, undeniably real, tested and proven rather than simply hoped for and assumed. I think it revealed something important about how we're actually going to build this marriage differently than either of us might have built it before everything we've already learned together. We were sitting together one evening, starting gently to talk about actual wedding logistics for the first time, and future wife, I noticed something happening in that conversation that I don't think would have happened the same way even a couple months ago. We disagreed, future wife, about something small, the size of the guest list. Whether to include some extended family members neither of us feels particularly close to, but who would likely expect an invitation regardless. And future wife, I want you to know what I noticed in myself during that small disagreement, because I think it matters more than the actual disagreement itself. I felt that old instinct rise up again, quieter this time, less urgent than it was during the anniversary situation, but still there. Still whispering that maybe I should just agree with whatever you wanted. Avoid the friction of genuine disagreement. Keep things easy and comfortable instead of risking any tension during this otherwise joyful season. But future wife, I caught that instinct this time, recognized it immediately for exactly what it was, and instead I told you honestly what I actually thought. That I felt strongly about keeping the guest list smaller and more intentional. Even though I understood that might create some complicated family dynamics, with people who would likely expect an invitation. And future wife, I watched you receive that honest disagreement not with frustration, but with genuine engagement, actually considering my perspective seriously instead of either dismissing it or capitulating to it immediately just to avoid conflict. We worked through that disagreement together, future wife, actually discussing it, rather than one of us simply deferring to the other out of habit or avoidance. And future wife, I think we landed somewhere neither of us had originally proposed, somewhere better actually, than either of our individual starting positions, built through honest negotiation rather than either capitulation or stubborn insistence. And future wife, I want you to know that this small moment, this ordinary disagreement about guest lists, actually felt more significant to me than it probably should have, because it proved something important about how we're actually going to build this entire marriage moving forward. I think about how easy it would have been, future wife, for both of us to fall back into old patterns during wedding planning specifically. A season that apparently creates enormous pressure for many couples, pressure that often surfaces exactly the kind of conflict-avoidant instincts we've both been working to examine more honestly these past several weeks. And future wife, I think choosing honesty in that small, ordinary disagreement about something as simple as a guest list actually matters more than any grand romantic gesture could accomplish. Because it proves this isn't just about surviving one dramatic crisis and returning to old patterns afterward. It's about actually building new patterns, sustained across every kind of decision, big and small, that a real marriage inevitably requires. Future wife, I called my therapist about this too, wanting her perspective on how to navigate wedding planning specifically, without falling back into old avoidant habits during what can apparently become an incredibly stressful season for many couples. And she told me something important, something about how wedding planning often becomes a kind of preview for how a couple will handle stress and disagreement throughout their entire marriage. The small decisions about guest lists and budgets and family expectations, actually revealing far more about a relationship's underlying health than the ceremony itself ever could. I think about that framing now, future wife, understanding that every small decision we navigate together over these coming months, however seemingly insignificant, is actually practice for the entire marriage still ahead of us. I think that's part of why I wanted to tell you about this specific disagreement, future wife, because I think it matters to see the evidence of change, showing up not just in dramatic, obviously significant moments, but in these small ordinary decisions too, the ones that might otherwise pass, without either of us fully noticing their importance. I keep thinking about the promise I made you the night I proposed, future wife, about respecting your answer completely, about never turning this into ongoing pressure regardless of what you decided. And future wife, I think that same principle now extends into every smaller decision we're navigating together during this engagement, respecting your genuine perspective even when it differs from mine, trusting our relationship enough to hold real disagreement without either of us needing to immediately smooth it over or avoid it entirely. We finalized the guest list eventually, future wife, somewhere in the middle of our original positions. And future wife, I think that compromise, reached through honest disagreement rather than either avoidance or stubborn insistence, actually taught me something valuable about how marriage decisions are probably going to work for the rest of our lives together. Not one person simply deferring to the other out of habit, and not either of us stubbornly refusing to consider the other's perspective, but actual, ongoing negotiation, built on mutual respect and genuine honesty about what each of us actually wants and needs. Future wife, I think about the wedding itself now, still months away, still full of countless small decisions we haven't navigated yet, and instead of feeling anxious about the potential for conflict during that planning process, I find myself feeling something closer to confidence, understanding that we've already proven, through this small guest list disagreement and everything before it, that we're capable of navigating real difficulty honestly, together, without either of us needing to sacrifice genuine perspective just to preserve superficial harmony. Future wife, I think that's actually one of the greatest gifts everything we've been through together has given us. Not the absence of future disagreement, but genuine confidence in our ability to navigate it honestly, whatever form it eventually takes. I think it revealed something neither of us expected this early in the wedding planning process. You came home quieter than usual, future wife, and I noticed it immediately, that particular stillness I've learned to recognize now, and I asked you gently what was on your mind, instead of assuming everything was simply fine, because the day itself had otherwise gone well. You told me, future wife, that trying on dresses had brought up something unexpected, a wave of grief mixed in with all the joy, missing your grandmother, who passed a few years before we ever met, who you'd always imagined would be there for exactly this moment, helping you choose, offering opinions you'd probably have gently ignored anyway, but would have loved hearing regardless. Future wife, I listened to you explain this, understanding immediately that this wasn't really about the dress itself, but about the specific ache of building this joyful new chapter, while carrying an absence that no amount of happiness could fully erase. I didn't try to fix it, future wife, didn't offer easy reassurance, or rush towards some solution that might have made the moment more comfortable for me, but less honest for what you were actually feeling. I just sat with you, the way I've learned to sit with difficult feelings rather than immediately trying to resolve them. And future wife, you told me that meant more to you than anything I could have said, that having space to simply feel the complicated mixture of joy and grief together, without either being minimized in service of the other, felt like exactly what you needed in that moment. We talked for a long time about your grandmother, future wife, stories I hadn't heard before, small details about her personality, her humor, the specific way she used to hum while cooking. And future wife, I found myself thinking about my own grandmother's jewelry, now permanently on your hand, and how strange and beautiful it is that both of our family histories are somehow woven into this wedding we're building together. The presence of people who won't physically be there, but whose influence and love clearly shaped who we've each become. I told you, future wife, that I wanted to find some way to honor your grandmother during the actual ceremony. Something meaningful but not overwhelming. A small acknowledgement of her presence in spirit, even though she can't be there in person. And future wife, you cried again, gently this time, grateful tears rather than overwhelmed ones. And you told me you'd love that that you'd been quietly worrying about how to bring up something so tender without it feeling like it might dampen the day's overall joy. Future wife, I think that conversation taught me something important about wedding planning that I hadn't fully anticipated before this specific moment, something beyond simply navigating disagreements about guest lists or budgets. I think it taught me that this entire process is going to keep surfacing unexpected emotional layers, grief alongside joy, complicated family history alongside hopeful future building, and future wife. I think handling those layers honestly, giving them space instead of rushing past them toward more comfortable, more straightforwardly celebratory conversations, is going to matter just as much as any of the practical decisions we're navigating together. I think about my own family history too, future wife, understanding that I'll probably have similar unexpected moments as this process continues. Memories of relatives who won't be there, complicated feelings about milestones that inevitably surface both celebration and loss simultaneously. And future wife, I want you to know that I'm grateful we're building the kind of relationship where those complicated feelings can actually be expressed honestly, rather than either of us feeling pressure to perform uncomplicated happiness throughout this entire process, just because a wedding is supposed to be exclusively joyful. We ended up spending part of that evening looking through old photos, future wife, some of your grandmother, some of my own relatives who won't be present at the wedding either, and future wife. I think that evening, unplanned and emotionally complicated as it turned out to be, actually became one of the more meaningful moments of this entire engagement so far. Not because it was easy or straightforwardly celebratory, but because it was honest. Because we let ourselves feel everything that was actually present, instead of curating only the emotions that felt appropriate for what's supposed to be an uncomplicated, joyful season. Future wife, I think about the actual wedding day now, still months away, and I find myself hoping it carries that same permission for complexity, that same space for grief alongside joy, for absence alongside presence, for everything that actually comes with building a new chapter of life, while still honoring everyone who shaped us into the people capable of building it together in the first place. I don't want our wedding to be a performance of uncomplicated happiness, future wife. I want it to be honest, the way everything else we've built together has slowly become honest, complicated and real and full of exactly the kind of depth that only comes from actually feeling everything present in a given moment, instead of curating away whatever doesn't fit some idealized picture of how the day is supposed to look. I keep thinking about your grandmother now, future wife, someone I never got to meet, but who apparently shaped so much of who you are. The same way my own grandmother's jewelry now connects you to generations of women in my family you also never got to meet directly. Future wife, I think that's part of what makes weddings actually meaningful. Beyond just the celebration itself, this strange, beautiful weaving together of everyone who came before, present in spirit even when absent in person, their influence woven so completely into who we've each become that celebrating our future together necessarily means honoring them too, however we eventually decide to do that during the actual ceremony itself.